The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke and the distant murmur of waves lapping against Lake Nicaragua as you make your way into the early 16th century settlement of Granada. Spanish conquistadors, their armor dulled by the relentless tropical sun, stride confidently through narrow cobblestone streets lined with freshly built adobe homes and Catholic churches whose bells ring in dominance over the land. You can almost hear the ghosts of the indigenous Corotega and Nahua peoples whispering in the shadows, their worlds overturned by the sudden appearance of these pale-skinned newcomers who wield steel and strange gods. Before we begin, if this little corner of calm has brought you any comfort, feel free to like the video and subscribe only if it feels genuine to you. No pressure. I'd also love to hear from you. Just drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always special to know we're all quietly gathered here from different corners of the world, like a family, scattered but still connected. All right, let's ease into the story together. You wander the markets where Spanish merchants trade cacao, indigo, and hides, all harvested by the labors of indigenous people forced into the encomienda system. The colonial city hums with activity, yet beneath the surface resentment simmers. The native population, once thriving in their own villages, has been decimated by disease and exploitation, their traditions surviving only in fragments, a carved mask here, a whispered song there. Historians still argue whether the early resistance movements of indigenous groups were coordinated rebellions or isolated acts of defiance. But what is clear is that violence never fully silenced their presence. The Corotega in the highlands fought valiantly, their spears no match for Spanish muskets, but their spirit lingers in the hills and legends you pass along the way. The Spanish chose Granada not just for its beauty, but for its strategic position on Lake Nicaragua, giving access to the San Juan River and indirectly the Caribbean. You feel the heat rise as you stand on the lake shore, where small boats rock lazily, unaware of the centuries of conflict this waterway would soon see. From here, trade routes extended deep into Central America, making Granada one of Spain's prized jewels in the region. Its sister city, Leon, built to the northwest, quickly became a rival, the two cities embodying the seeds of division that would later haunt Nicaragua. You can almost smirk at how, even in the earliest days, human ambition can't resist drawing invisible lines of rivalry, even when facing a common conqueror. As Catholic missionaries spread through the countryside, converting indigenous communities and erecting churches where ancient temples once stood, they also recorded local languages and customs, often with the smugness of men convinced they were saving the souls they barely understood. Yet in the quiet of rural villages, you notice small altars where indigenous deities still share space with Christian saints, a fusion of beliefs born from survival. This subtle defiance is almost comical. The colonizers think they have eradicated old gods, while the villagers know the gods are simply wearing new names. Decades pass as you continue to roam the city streets, now adorned with Spanish-style plazas and stately buildings, yet the beauty hides cracks. The Spanish elite bask in their wealth, while indigenous laborers and enslaved Africans toil in fields and workshops. Quirky as it sounds, some early colonial officials were more concerned about whether their imported Spanish horses got proper feed than whether the people harvesting crops survived the season. You overhear a friar complaining about the moral decay brought by gold and greed, his voice drowned out by the laughter of merchants counting coins. From the surrounding hills you gaze down at Granada and Leon like a pair of glittering siblings constantly trying to outshine one another. This rivalry, seemingly petty in the 1500s, would later spill into wars and civil conflicts. You sense that the seeds of Nicaragua's turbulent future are already being planted quietly, invisibly, in the ambitions of men who cannot see beyond their own lifetimes. At night, under the flicker of lanterns, the city feels almost serene, yet you know beneath this calm facade lies a history of oppression and resistance waiting to surface. Your journey takes you beyond the Spanish strongholds into remote valleys where remnants of indigenous groups continue their lives far from colonial eyes. Here they preserve their languages and traditions, trading discreetly with Spanish settlers while quietly ignoring the crown's decrees. These are not the stories written in official chronicles, but whispered in the wind and carried by elders to the next generation. One elder laughs softly when telling you of a time his grandfather's village tricked a Spanish tax collector into thinking the harvest had failed, hiding their stores deep in caves. That small victory, though unrecorded, glows with pride in his eyes. As the 17th century approaches, you notice Granada growing ever wealthier, its houses painted in bright colors, its markets swelling with goods flowing from the heart of Central America to the Caribbean. This wealth, of course, comes at a price one paid by those at the bottom of the colonial hierarchy. And in the stillness of a humid evening, as you listen to crickets chirping and watch fireflies dance above the lake, you can't help but think this piece feels fragile, like a beautiful vase balancing on a ledge, waiting for the slightest tremor to send it crashing down. You follow the narrow waterways that twist and turn through lush jungle, where the sound of parrots echoes and the scent of wet earth lingers after the rain. The 17th century has arrived, and with it, the once quiet roots of Nicaragua become lifelines of trade and targets for plunder. The San Juan River, shimmering under the midday sun, serves as the artery through which Spanish goods flow, cacao, indigo, precious metals, all destined for ports on the Caribbean. But these same waters invite danger. You can almost see the shadow of a sleek, low-hulled ship sliding into view, pirates, their flags fluttering in the humid breeze, eager to snatch treasures before they reach Spanish hands. You stand at the edge of Granada, now prosperous, watching its people live in a mix of fear and defiance. The city has become a golden target, and in 1665 a famous buccaneer named Henry Morgan sets his eyes on it. You follow his path as he storms the settlement, plundering homes and setting fire to its streets, the smoke twisting against a blue sky as families scatter into the countryside. It's almost absurd how a city that prided itself on Spanish power could fall to a handful of pirates with more audacity than manpower. Even centuries later, historians still argue whether Granada was attacked more out of strategy or pure opportunism, but either way it leaves scars, physical and psychological, that never quite fade. The rivalry between Spain and other European powers only fuels these raids. You notice English, French and Dutch ships lurking in Caribbean waters, each one eager to disrupt Spanish dominance. The Caribbean becomes a playground of empire, and Nicaragua sits at the center like a prize, waiting to be claimed. You pass through Leon, where Spanish officials fret over defending trade routes, their polished boots tapping nervously on stone floors as maps are rolled and unrolled in desperate council meetings. They strengthen fortifications along rivers and coasts, yet the attacks continue. Quirky as it may sound, some pirates were treated almost like celebrities by the locals who admired their boldness against the Spanish crown, though they wouldn't dare say it aloud. The jungles of Nicaragua also tell their own stories. Indigenous guides lead smugglers and runaway slaves through hidden paths, helping them evade Spanish patrols. These forgotten alliances form an undercurrent of resistance, proof that the colonial grip was never absolute. You sit with a small group one night, listening to their hushed stories by a campfire, the flames reflecting in their eyes as they talk about freedom as if it were a living thing just out of reach, but worth risking everything for. The 18th century begins and trade only intensifies. The Spanish crown, desperate to protect its wealth, invests heavily in coastal defenses. You stroll along makeshift forts where cannons point menacingly toward the sea, their barrels rusted but still intimidating. Yet no matter how many cannons they mount, the threat persists. Granada burns again under pirate attacks, and even Leon suffers raids. There's a grim humor in watching Spanish officials issue new decrees with each attack, as if paper orders could stop cannonballs. Meanwhile, the golden route through Nicaragua, linking the Pacific to the Caribbean, draws not just pirates, but merchants, explorers and dreamers. Some envision cutting a canal through the Isthmus long before the Panama Canal was even conceived. You chuckle softly at the thought, centuries of scheming over a strip of land with maps drawn and redrawn by men in powdered wigs who never felt the heat of Nicaragua's sun. In the countryside, Spanish power still holds, but cracks appear. Villagers grumble about taxes and forced labor, while the elite cling to their privileges. The rivalry between Granada and Leon deepens, each city vying for influence and resources. During festivals, you watch as parades in one city are matched by even grander ones in the other, a petty competition masking deeper political divisions. Historians still debate whether this rivalry was purely political or rooted in economic interests, but you sense it's a mix of both two siblings fighting for their parents' approval, even as the house burns around them. Trade with other colonies introduces new ideas too. As you walk through markets, you overhear conversations about revolts in distant lands, whispers of change carried by merchants who have seen the world beyond Spanish control. A sailor from the Caribbean tells tales of maroon communities, escaped slaves who built free settlements in jungles and mountains, his voice low, almost reverent, as if speaking of ghosts. These stories spread quietly but powerfully, planting seeds of possibility in Nicaraguan minds. As night falls over the San Juan River, you watch fireflies flicker above the water, their light mirrored in the ripples. A merchant nearby complains about losing cargo to yet another raid, while a local woman mutters about the crown taking too much and giving too little. The stars above shine indifferent to human squabbles, but you can feel the tension tightening like a drawn bowstring. This is no longer just about pirates stealing gold. It's about an empire stretched thin, a people learning to question their chains, and a land too wild to ever truly submit. The dawn comes with a strange calm. You hear church bells in Granada calling people to mass, as if everything is normal, yet you know better. The colonial facade still stands, but the ground beneath it trembles faintly, almost imperceptibly. You walk through the city gates and glance back one last time at the whitewashed buildings, the proud churches, the bustling markets, and you can't help but wonder how much longer they can stand against the storms to come. The humid air grows thicker as you leave the interior cities behind and drift toward the coastline, where the dense jungles meet the Caribbean Sea. Here lies the Mosquito Coast, a stretch of untamed land where Spanish authority fades into uncertainty, and the rhythms of local tribes dominate the landscape. You watch as the Mosquito people paddle canoes through mangrove channels, their movements swift and quiet, the sea breeze rustling through palm leaves above. The Spanish tried to extend their control here, but the coast itself seems to resist them, with treacherous waters and tribes unwilling to bow. Into this wild frontier stepped the British quietly at first, then with increasing confidence forging alliances with the Mosquito in ways that make Spanish officials grind their teeth in frustration. You follow a British trader unloading rifles and textiles onto the shore, his face smug as he shakes hands with a Mosquito chief. In exchange, the British gain access to valuable local resources and, more importantly, a foothold to counter Spanish power in Central America. The Mosquito, pragmatic and fiercely independent, see an opportunity as well, weapons to defend their lands and leverage against Spanish encroachment. You almost chuckle at the irony, Spain with its grand armies, and gold is being outmaneuvered by a few British ships and some clever diplomacy. Historians still argue whether the Mosquito were manipulated by the British or skillfully used foreign alliances to strengthen their autonomy, but walking among them you sense they knew exactly what they were doing. By the mid-17th and 18th centuries, the British establish a presence strong enough to make Spain nervous. You watch as Spanish governors send desperate reports to Guatemala and Madrid, warning that the coast is slipping from their grasp. Yet their efforts to reclaim it falter, hampered by distance disease and the rugged terrain. The British, meanwhile, continue to support the Mosquito kings, even recognizing a Mosquito monarchy under their protection. You stand by as British officers raise their flag alongside Mosquito banners, a quiet but powerful message to Spain that their monopoly over Central America is broken. The Mosquito kingdom itself fascinates you. It blends indigenous customs with European influences, creating something neither fully native nor entirely colonial. You attend a council where chiefs discuss both fishing rights and trade agreements, With the British, their voices steady and confident. They wear a mix of traditional attire and European jackets, a visual symbol of their hybrid world. Spanish envoys occasionally try to negotiate, but they are met with polite refusals or outright hostility. The coast, it seems, belongs to no empire but its own people, and the alliances they choose. The Spanish view this alliance as treachery. They label the Mosquito as rebels, even savages, though you can't help but notice the hypocrisy. Spain enslaves, taxes and coerces, while the British at least offer trade and recognition, even if their motives are far from pure. In Leon and Granada, officials grumble about British interference, drawing new maps that mark the coast as Spanish territory, while in reality it slips further from their control. Some colonial administrators attempt to launch military campaigns, but they rarely succeed, and those who survive the jungles return with tales of relentless resistance and harsh conditions. You walk along the shore one evening, the sun setting in streaks of orange and purple over the Caribbean. The waves lap gently, but you know this coast is far from peaceful. British ships anchor offshore, their crews laughing over rum, while Mosquito warriors patrol the forest's boughs, slung over their shoulders, rifles glinting in the fading light. You overhear a British officer boasting that this coastline is the key to cutting off Spain's arm, his words dripping with both pride and menace. You smirk quietly. Empire always comes with grand metaphors. Yet not all is simple partnership. You sense tensions too. British demands sometimes clash with Mosquito independence, and there are whispers of villages resisting both foreign influences. Still, the relationship endures because it serves both parties against a common rival. Quirky as it sounds, some Mosquito chiefs even traveled to England, sailing across the ocean to meet the king, returning with stories so strange they blur the line between legend and truth. Imagine an indigenous leader wrapped in furs, stepping into the cold fog of London, a meeting of worlds so different it feels like a dream. This British presence isn't just a local nuisance, it reshapes regional politics. The Spanish crown, already overstretched, begins to lose its once absolute grip on Central America. Trade routes shift, smuggling thrives, and the idea that Spain is invincible begins to crumble. You pass through a Spanish garrison where soldiers grumble about lack of supplies, their uniforms tattered, their morale low. They fear ambushes, not just from pirates, but from local allies of the British. The empire that once loomed so large now seems fragile, its control fraying at the edges. Meanwhile, in the interior, Granada and Leon watch these developments with both worry and opportunism. Some elites secretly trade with the British, seeking profit despite the risk of Spanish punishment. Others double down on loyalty to the crown, hoping to secure favor. The rivalry between the two cities only deepens as they take different stances on foreign alliances and local power. You sense that the coast's defiance has a ripple effect inland, quietly inspiring those who dream of loosening Spain's grip. As the century turns, the Caribbean hums with the sounds of shifting alliances, cannon fire in the distance, and merchants haggling in a dozen languages. The Mosquito Coast remains a place of mystery and danger, where Spain's power fades like mist at dawn. You stand on the edge of this contested world, the salty breeze on your face, and realize that the struggle here isn't just about land or trade. It's about the idea that no empire lasts forever, no matter how many maps it draws or forts it builds. You make your way back inland, where the colonial streets of Leon and Granada buzz with rumors and unease. The late 18th century bleeds into the early 19th, and the Spanish Empire, once towering and unshakable, now trembles under the weight of its own troubles. In the smoky taverns, merchants whisper of revolts in South America, and priests murmur cautiously about ideas spreading from across the Atlantic, words like liberty and rights carried in the pages of contraband books. You stroll past a printing press where an apprentice nervously hides pamphlets beneath stacks of church decrees, his hands shaking as if the paper itself could burn him. The cracks in the empire widen. Spain's grip on its colonies weakens, strained by costly wars in Europe, including the Napoleonic invasion that leaves its monarchy humiliated and vulnerable. across the Atlantic colonies sense the faltering power and begin to test the limits of obedience. In Nicaragua, this uncertainty fuels both fear and ambition. You wander into a council meeting in León where officials argue over increased taxes to fund Spain's military needs, their voices rising and tempers flaring. One landowner slams his fist on the table, shouting that they are being bled dry for a crown that can no longer protect them. You can't help but grin slightly. History loves a good moment of dramatic irony. Meanwhile, ordinary people feel the strain too. Farmers grumble about forced contributions, indigenous communities tighten their bonds in defiance, and workers in the cities share sips of cheap rum while venting their anger. Historians still argue whether these frustrations were the true spark of rebellion or merely kindling waiting for a bigger fire. You watch as even priests, once the firm backbone of Spanish rule, start subtly questioning their allegiance inspired by theological arguments that perhaps God does not favor tyranny after all. Rebellion brews quietly at first. Small uprisings flare up here and there, often crushed quickly, but each one leaves behind embers that refuse to die. In the highlands, you walk with a group of peasants who speak in hushed voices about refusing to pay taxes, their faces lit by moonlight and determination. They laugh nervously at their own courage, knowing the punishment could be severe, yet they continue to plan. Quirky as it sounds, some even use church processions as covers for secret meetings, the sound of hymns masking whispers of revolution. The rivalry between Granada and León, once about prestige and economics, now takes on political weight. Granada's elites lean toward maintaining Spanish ties, hoping to preserve their wealth and order, while León becomes a hotbed of reformist and rebellious ideas. You feel the tension crackle in the air when you pass from one city to the other, like crossing an invisible line between two futures. Even the festivals reflect the divide. Granada's parades celebrate Spanish traditions, while León's are increasingly infused with local pride and subtle resistance. Foreign influences seep in as well. British merchants continue to stir trouble along the coast, while news from the north of the United States declaring independence decades earlier still echoes like a distant drum. You overhear a young student in León quoting Thomas Jefferson, his voice trembling with excitement, while his older professor warns him to lower his tone before someone reports him. Ideas, after all, are more dangerous than weapons when an empire is already cracking. The early 1800s bring a wave of revolts across Spanish America from Mexico to Argentina, and Nicaragua feels the ripple effects. Revolutionary leaders like Simón Bolívar become legendary figures whose names circulate even in the quietest corners of the country. Farmers who can barely read still know the stories of battles fought far away, and those tales feed their dreams of freedom. You can almost hear the collective heartbeat of a region that realizes it no longer has to endure the old order forever. Spain, desperate to maintain control, issues reforms and promises, but they arrive too late and too weak to stem the tide. You watch as officials in Granada cling to these promises, while in León, leaders scoff and demand more. The tension erupts in occasional clashes, small skirmishes that hint at the larger storm forming just beyond the horizon. Historians still debate whether these local conflicts were truly revolutionary or simply power struggles disguised as idealism, but standing here you sense the truth is both as messy as history always is. One night, as you sit under a starlit sky, on the outskirts of León, a rider gallops past, carrying news that another revolt has broken out in a neighboring province. The villagers gather around him, listening with wide eyes, their faces a mixture of fear and hope. The air smells of wood smoke and damp earth, and in that moment you feel it, the old order is trembling. The rider finishes his story, and silence follows. Then a slow, deliberate cheer rises, not loud, but full of meaning. The people know change is coming, they just don't know when or how. You continue your journey through the countryside where volcanoes loom like ancient sentinels over the land. Their quiet presence reminds you that eruptions can lie dormant for years before exploding. Nicaragua itself feels like one of those volcanoes, now building pressure, waiting for the right moment to unleash the force that will reshape everything. In the distance, church bells ring, not for celebration this time, but as a warning something is shifting, and no empire decree can stop it. The whispers of rebellion grow louder as you move through the streets of Leon in the early months of 1821. The air feels charged, as if the very walls are listening to the words of students, priests, and merchants who now openly speak of liberty. The ideas that once trickled in like secret streams born from the Enlightenment nurtured by the revolutions of the Americas are now rushing like a flood. You stop by a cafe where young men discuss the recent independence movements sweeping through South America, their fingers tapping on wooden tables in rhythm with their arguments. Names like Bolivar and San Martin leap from their lips like incantations, fueling their courage. Across the table, an older landowner shakes his head, insisting that chaos will follow any break from Spain. You sip your coffee, slowly amused by how one person's dream is another's nightmare. The success of neighboring revolutions, especially Mexico's independence under Agustín de Iturbide, sends shockwaves through Nicaragua. Messages travel faster than ever by riders, by ships, by traders who carry more than goods. You overhear a mule driver telling villagers about Mexican rebels who defied Spain, and won his voice crackling with excitement as he gestures wildly as if he had fought beside them. These stories embolden local leaders who realize they are no longer alone in their fight. Historians still argue whether Nicaragua's path to independence was a cautious response to these victories or an inevitable result of its own internal pressures. But you can see both truths intertwining like vines on an old wall. Meanwhile, the Spanish crown, already reeling from losing so many colonies, tries desperately to maintain its grip. Royal decrees arrive from Guatemala City demanding loyalty and promising reforms, but the tone feels hollow. In Granada, the elites waver, torn between fear of losing their wealth and fear of being left behind if independence becomes inevitable. You watch them host grand dinners where they debate behind closed doors, their voices rising while silverware clinks nervously against plates. In Leon, however, the mood is different. Meetings are held not in palaces, but in modest rooms where leaders speak with conviction about breaking free. The rivalry between the two cities becomes a metaphor for the country itself, one clinging to the past, the other stepping boldly into the unknown. You travel south to the rural areas where the farmers, indigenous communities and workers have their own view of events. They care little for political speeches or royal decrees. What they want is relief from burdens, freedom from taxes, and the right to live without constant interference from distant powers. One farmer laughs bitterly as he tells you, "Let them fight over titles. We just want to keep our harvest." His words carry the quiet wisdom of those who endure no matter which flag flies above them. Yet even here, hope stirs, because when the powerful fight, the weak sometimes find room to breathe. The church plays a complicated role in this drama. Some priests side with the people, using their sermons to slip in messages about justice and dignity, while others remain loyal to the Spanish crown, warning that rebellion is a sin. You sit in a dimly lit chapel as a young priest carefully chooses his words, his voice trembling with passion. God does not bless oppression. The congregation murmurs in agreement, and you see the spark in their eyes. Quirky as it sounds, revolutions often begin not with guns, but with whispers in places like this where faith and courage intertwine. By mid-1821, Central America is buzzing with movement. In Guatemala, independence sentiments surge, and when the Act of Independence of Central America is signed on September 15th, the news travels quickly down the trade routes to Nicaragua. You find yourself in Leon on that day, standing in a crowded plaza as a messenger reads the proclamation aloud. The crowd erupts, not with fireworks or trumpets, but with a swelling cheer that feels both joyous and cautious. People embrace tears, mix with smiles, and the air fills with the sound of church bells ringing wildly. Granada receives the news with mixed emotions. Some celebrate while others mutter that the new order may be worse than the old one. Historians still debate whether Nicaragua's declaration was a bold act or merely a reluctant following of Guatemala's lead. Either way, you sense the atmosphere shifting. Independence has arrived, at least on paper, but its meaning is far from settled. You walk through the streets at night where families light candles in their windows and the flickering flames cast long shadows on the walls. The city feels alive, trembling with anticipation and fear. A group of young men toast with cheap rum, their voices cracking as they shout, "Viva la Independencia!" while an old woman nearby shakes her head, muttering that freedom won't fill empty stomachs. You wander into the countryside once more where the stars spread across the sky like scattered silver. Here, the Declaration of Independence feels distant, almost unreal, yet the people still talk about it by their fires. One elder leans close to you and says, "We've seen masters come and go, let's see if this time is different." His words echo in your mind as you watch the flames dance. You realize independence is not a moment, it's a journey, one that has only just begun. As dawn breaks over the volcanoes, their peaks glowing in the early light, you feel the weight of history settling around you. Nicaragua has joined the chorus of nations breaking free from Spain, but you know this song is far from finished. The land hums with possibility and danger, the perfect mix for a story that will only grow more complicated. You rise with the early light and the smell of wood smoke curling from village chimneys as the memory of September 15th, 1821 lingers like a fresh wound and a new scar all at once. Independence is proclaimed, yet the streets of Leon and Granada reveal more questions than celebrations. You walk past groups of townsfolk clustered in doorways, their voices hushed, debating whether life will truly change now that Spanish rule has been severed on paper. The declaration feels momentous, yes, but fragile, as though a single gust of wind could scatter it like ashes. You pause under the shade of an orange tree where a farmer scoffs to his neighbor. "So who's our new master now?" His tone is half joking, half terrified, and entirely human. The act of independence spreads quickly throughout Central America, carried by couriers galloping over dusty roads, their horses frothing as they deliver proclamations to towns big and small. You stand at the edge of a plaza in Granada as the declaration is read aloud. Some clap cautiously, others simply cross themselves and return to their work. There are no grand parades or cannon fire, just an underlying hum, a realization that a massive shift has occurred, even if daily life still feels the same. Historians still argue whether Nicaraguans at this moment were genuinely united in their desire for independence or swept along by the decisions made in Guatemala City. But as you watch the faces in the crowd, you sense a complex blend of pride, fear, and confusion. The local elites step into the vacuum left by Spain. Many of them already wealthy landowners now claim leadership roles, drafting new policies that look suspiciously like the old ones. You wander into a meeting hall where they sit on polished wooden chairs, debating fiercely about trade routes and taxes while peasants wait outside in the heat, hoping for news. The irony is thick. Freedom has been declared, yet power remains in the same few hands. Still, the atmosphere carries an undercurrent of possibility, as if at any moment someone could steer the country in a new direction. The rivalry between Leon and Granada sharpens during these early days of independence. Leon, proud of its liberal leanings, pushes for reforms and greater equality, while Granada, more conservative, fears chaos and clings to order. You walk from one city to the other and feel the contrast as strongly as the change in the air. Leon's streets are alive with spirited debates in cafes and classrooms, while Granada's gatherings are marked by wary glances and guarded conversations. This division, subtle at first, soon hardens into an enduring fault line that will shape Nicaragua's future struggles. Beyond the cities, the countryside remains cautious. Indigenous communities and rural farmers are told they are now free citizens, but many shrug unconvinced. You join a nighttime gathering around a fire where men and women discuss what independence means to them. One man, his face lined by years of labor, says softly, "We've traded a distant king for nearby lords." Yet another, a younger voice, counters with optimism, "If the chains can be broken once, they can be broken again." Their words drift into the night, carried by the crackle of flames and the songs of crickets, a reminder that true freedom is as much a feeling as it is a law. Foreign powers watch Nicaragua with sharp interest. Britain, already entangled on the Mosquito coast, eyes the new state with both suspicion and opportunity. The United States, with its own dreams of influence, begins to whisper about the potential of an interoceanic canal. You picture American merchants drawing lines on maps, imagining Nicaragua as a bridge for trade and power, while British envoys sip tea on Caribbean shores, plotting how to keep their foothold. It's almost funny. Nicaragua has just stepped out of one empire's shadow, only to find itself in the crosshairs of others. Amid this, small but meaningful changes begin to ripple. Local militias form, eager to defend the new nation, though their uniforms are ragged and their weapons mismatched. You watch them train in a field at dawn, their determination more impressive than their coordination. Quirky as it sounds, some farmers turn their cattle bells into makeshift warning signals, believing that if foreign troops or pirates approach, they'll be ready to sound the alarm. It's an image both charming and tragic, an improvised defense for a fragile freedom. The Catholic Church, still powerful, begins to adjust its stance. Some priests bless the independence movement, declaring it divinely sanctioned, while others grumble that rebellion has loosened moral order. You sit in a pew during a mass where the sermon walks a tightrope between loyalty to the old faith and the new political reality. The priest's voice wavers, as though even he is unsure whether he is praying for the kingdom of heaven or the survival of a fledgling nation. Leaders, such as Miguel Larrañaga, who helped draft the Act of Independence, become symbols of cautious hope. You walk past a statue erected in his honor years later, but during these early days, he and others like him face the enormous task of building a nation from scratch. There is no manual for this. They must invent as they go, balancing local interests with the broader unity of Central America. For a brief, fragile moment, Nicaragua is swept into the larger vision of the United Provinces of Central America, a federation meant to bind the newly independent states together. The dream of unity feels noble, almost poetic, as though Central America could rise as a single, strong voice. At night, you sit on a hill overlooking Granada, the city lights flickering like stars fallen to earth. The lake shimmers under moonlight, and the volcanoes stand silent and immovable. You breathe in the warm air and feel the weight of this moment, the uncertainty, the hope, the dread. Independence has been declared, but independence must also be defended, shaped, and lived. You sense the story is far from over. The real test lies ahead. The morning sun rises over the cobblestone streets of León as church bells echo, not for a holiday, but for the announcement of a new political arrangement. It is 1823 and Nicaragua has been swept into the Union of the United Provinces of Central America, a federation linking Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Costa Rica, and Nicaragua under one fragile banner. You watch as town criers read the news aloud in plazas, their voices trembling, more from anticipation than authority. People cheer, but the sound is cautious, as though they sense this union is built on hope rather than strength. You smile to yourself. History loves to dress up uncertainty as grand unity. For a brief moment, the dream of Central American solidarity burns bright. The leaders of the new federation envision a republic strong enough to stand against foreign threats and internal divisions. You step into a hall in Guatemala City, where delegates from each state gather under high wooden ceilings, their arguments filling the air like a storm. They speak of shared defense, economic cooperation, and Republican ideals, yet beneath their speeches you hear the scratching sound of rivalries taking notes. Historians still debate whether this union was doomed from the start due to geography and local identities, or whether it might have survived with better leadership. Standing there, you feel both answers pulsing in the room. In Nicaragua, the federation stirs mixed reactions. León, with its liberal leanings, embraces the idea of a united republic that promises reforms and a new order. Granada, more conservative, eyes the federation with suspicion, fearing it will erode its local power. You walk through Granada's elegant plazas, hearing merchants mutter that the new government will drain their wealth for someone else's benefit. Across the country, some communities barely register the change at all. They continue planting crops and fishing, wary of distant governments that rarely touch their lives directly. You sit with a farmer on his porch as he shrugs Union Independence crown. It's all the same if the tax collector still comes. The Federation does bring moments of promise. Laws are drafted to improve trade and standardize governance. You follow caravans moving goods more freely across borders, traders smiling at the thought of fewer restrictions. In schools, young teachers inspire students with lessons about a united Central America, their chalk hands shaping words like liberty and equality on dusty blackboards. You watch a child trace these words in the air with his finger, his eyes bright with belief in something larger than himself. Quirky as it sounds, a few even start drawing maps that erase the borders between states, replacing them with a single name, Republica Federal. But the reality soon bites. Local power struggles never fade. You see the rivalry between Leon and Granada worsen, spilling over into disputes about which city should hold more influence in the Federation. Even in quiet markets, gossip thrives. Leon supports liberal policies aligned with the Federation's ideals, while Granada aligns with conservative forces resistant to change. The divide becomes almost theatrical, with each city hosting its own celebrations, its own heroes, and its own visions of the future. You can't help but think of two actors on the same stage, performing entirely different plays. The rest of the region isn't much better. El Salvador resents Guatemalan dominance, Honduras flirts with rebellion, and Costa Rica quietly distances itself from the drama. You witness skirmishes and hear rumors of conspiracies. In one tense night, you slip into a backroom meeting where local leaders whisper about whether Nicaragua should stay in the Federation at all. The candles flicker as one man leans forward and says, "Why should Leon's ideas dictate to Granada or Guatemala's to us?" His words hang heavy in the air. Foreign powers lurk waiting for their chance. Britain keeps its grip on the Mosquito coast, subtly undermining the Federation by strengthening ties with local Mosquito leaders. You see British officers shaking hands with chiefs offering trade and protection, their smiles too polished to be genuine. The United States, smelling opportunity, begins to cast its eyes on Nicaragua's Isthmus, quietly exploring the idea of a canal. You picture American envoys with rolled-up maps tracing lines across the land as if it already belongs to them. The fragile Federation, already cracking internally, now faces pressure from outside. Despite this turbulence, moments of unity still shine through. When a neighboring province suffers from famine, supplies flow from Nicaragua, and gratitude ripples back in heartfelt letters. In a small town, you attend a festival where people wave the Federation's flag with pride, dancing under lanterns that sway in the breeze. For a few hours, the divisions vanish, replaced by laughter and song. These glimpses of harmony make you ache, knowing how rare they will become. As the years pass, instability deepens. The Federation's central government grows weaker, and conflicts among states flare into open fighting. You travel back to Leon and find the city buzzing with talk of secession, its residents tired of Guatemala's leadership. Granada, meanwhile, is already scheming how to align itself with whichever side guarantees its power. Historians still argue whether Nicaragua's loyalty to the Federation was ever real or simply convenient while it lasted. One evening, as the sun bleeds red over the volcanic ridges, you sit alone on a hillside watching smoke rise from distant villages where disputes have turned violent. The dream of unity, once so promising, feels like mist dissipating in the heat. The Federation, much like the independence that preceded it, has failed to deliver the stability its people crave. You feel the land itself sigh under the weight of expectations unmet. The night deepens and you hear distant drums from a nearby town, not of celebration, but of preparation. Men gathering weapons, sharpening alliances, forming and breaking in the shadows. Nicaragua has stepped into independence only to find itself tangled in a new web of conflicts. As the stars shimmer above, indifferent to human struggles, you realize the young republic has yet to face its greatest trials. The fragile unity of Central America is unraveling, and soon Nicaragua must choose its own path alone. The year is 1838 and the morning fog hangs low over Leon as you step into a city bracing itself for change. The union of the United Provinces of Central America is unraveling thread by thread, and Nicaragua feels the tug more sharply than most. You walk past a group of militia drilling in the plaza, their boots kicking up dust in rhythm with the sound of distant bells. They look determined, but their uniforms are patched, and their muskets are as old as their fathers. The federation that once promised strength now lies fractured, and each state begins to fend for itself. You sense a growing tension in the air, like a bowstring drawn taut, ready to snap. Within Nicaragua, the rivalry between Leon and Granada, once a simmering feud, has now boiled over into open hostility. Leon, the liberal stronghold, favors reforms and closer ties to the fading federation. Granada, the conservative city, prefers autonomy and alignment with powerful elites. You wander between these cities and notice how even their colors tell the story. Blue and white flags of differing designs flutter defiantly, each claiming to represent the true Nicaragua. Historians still debate whether these conflicts were about ideology or just power, dressed up in political language, but standing here, you see the answer is both. Ideals provide the mask, ambition drives the sword, civil strife erupts. You find yourself ducking behind a crumbling wall as skirmishes break out in the countryside, the crack of musket fire echoing through the hills. Smoke rises from a nearby hacienda, set ablaze, and villagers scatter, clutching what few belongings they can carry. The new republic, barely born, is already tearing at its own flesh. Quirky as it sounds, some farmers use church bells not for mass, but to warn of approaching troops, the sound carrying across valleys like a ghostly alarm. The land itself seems weary of this endless fighting, its fields trampled and its rivers muddied. Despite the chaos, moments of eerie calm still appear. One afternoon you stand on the shores of Lake Nicaragua watching fishermen mend their nets as if war were a distant storm. They speak little of politics, only of the catch, but when pressed an old man grunts, "Leaders change, hunger doesn't." His words, simple yet profound, cut through the noise of grand speeches and manifestos. It's a reminder that while cities burn over ideologies, the common people bear the scars. Foreign powers, ever watchful, step into the cracks. Britain reinforces its hold on the Mosquito coast, sending sleek ships to patrol the Caribbean waters and supplying their Mosquito allies with arms. You follow a British envoy walking confidently through a coastal village, distributing rifles and promises in equal measure. The Spanish are long gone, yet their shadow has been replaced by new ones. Meanwhile, whispers of American interest grow louder, carried on the same winds that rustle through the banana groves. You picture maps unfurling in Washington fingers, tracing potential routes for a canal that could cut through Nicaragua, giving the United States control over a passage the world covets. In Leon, liberal leaders call for a republic modeled on ideals of equality, yet their voices are drowned out by the sound of Granada's conservatives rallying for order under their own terms. Battles rage back and forth, cities captured and recaptured, and you can almost laugh at the absurdity of it all. Two visions of a better future, fighting so hard they may destroy the very future they seek to build. Even the clergy takes sides, with some priests blessing liberal troops, while others proclaim conservative victories as divine favor. Sermons turn into propaganda altars, into podiums. You slip into a meeting where exhausted leaders argue late into the night. Candles burn low and the room smells of wax and sweat. One man slams his hand on the table, shouting that Nicaragua must finally break from the collapsing federation. Another counters that separation means vulnerability to foreign powers. The debate spirals until silence falls and a grim consensus forms. The federation is dead, and Nicaragua must stand on its own. In 1838, the decision becomes official. Nicaragua secedes, becoming an independent republic. You feel the weight of this moment settle over the room like thick smoke. The people greet this news with a mix of celebration and dread. In Leon, fireworks crackle in the night sky, their sparks reflecting in the eyes of cheering crowds. In Granada, church bells ring solemnly, their tones heavy with caution. Across the countryside, villagers light small fires not for festivity but for warmth against the uncertainty ahead. Historians still argue whether this independence was born of strength or merely the collapse of something bigger. But as you watch the flames dance, you know that sometimes survival itself is a kind of strength. Yet autonomy does not bring peace. The civil conflicts persist now, fully internal, as liberals and conservatives vie for control. You walk past fields where soldiers march, their faces young and weary, many barely old enough to shave. They sing songs of patriotism, their voices cracking, and you feel both pride and sadness. Pride in their resolve, sadness in the futility of their struggle. The land dotted with volcanoes mirrors the Republic itself, beautiful, powerful, and prone to sudden, destructive eruptions. At night, you sit on a hill overlooking Leon as torches flicker along the city walls. The stars above seem brighter than usual, as if watching closely. You hear distant drums, not of celebration, but of mustering troops. The air smells of ash and damp earth, and you shiver not from the cold, but from the knowledge that this young republic is stepping into a future as uncertain as the path under your feet. The wind off the Caribbean smells of salt and distant gunpowder as you make your way back to the Mosquito coast, where colonial shadows still linger despite Nicaragua's independence. The British have tightened their presence here, reinforcing alliances with the Mosquito kings who continue to rule under the guise of British protection. You step ashore in a small coastal settlement and see a British officer shaking hands with a Mosquito leader, the Union Jack fluttering behind them. It's a quiet yet potent scene, one empire gone another sliding in. Spanish banners may have been torn down, but foreign interests never left. They merely changed their colours. Historians still argue whether Britain's influence here was genuine support for local autonomy or calculated imperialism cloaked in diplomacy, but walking these humid shores you feel the answer creeping through the mangroves: it was both. The British supply the Mosquito with firearms, ammunition, and trade goods in exchange for control over strategic ports and shipping routes. You watch as crates are unloaded from sleek ships, their contents gleaming in the Caribbean sun, while Spanish-style cannons in old forts rust uselessly nearby. Nicaragua's central government, weak and divided by civil strife, struggles to assert its authority over this region. Letters to London protesting British incursions are politely ignored or answered with vague reassurances. Meanwhile, British diplomats drink tea in shaded verandas, smiling at how easily they play the game. In the interior, you notice frustration mounting. Leaders in Leon and Granada argue fiercely over how to respond to this foreign encroachment. Leon's liberals call for negotiations, hoping treaties will secure sovereignty without bloodshed. Granada's conservatives urge a more aggressive stance, though their forces are too scattered to pose a real threat. The debates grow heated, fueled by pride and fear. You slip into a council room where men pound fists on tables, one shouting that Nicaragua will not be carved up like a feast. Another, more cynical, replies that the country is already being sliced just slowly, so no one notices until it's done. As if this weren't enough, a new player appears: the United States. You first hear their presence in whispers, merchants speaking of American investors buying land, sailors murmuring about surveys for a canal route. You travel to the port of San Juan del Norte, where American businessmen in tailored coats stroll the docks, their eyes measuring not just the land, but the opportunities to control it. They talk casually about building a canal that could link the Atlantic to the Pacific, reshaping global trade. Their tone is calm, almost friendly, but you sense the ambition beneath their words, sharp as a knife hidden in a smile. Quirky as it sounds, one of them even sketches a rough map in the sand with his walking stick, as if a nation's destiny can be drawn with a flick of the wrist. The rivalry between Britain and the United States begins to play out on Nicaraguan soil. You watch British officers and American agents exchange cold nods in coastal taverns, each aware the other is plotting. Both powers exploit Nicaragua's internal divisions, offering support to whichever faction suits their interests at the moment. Leon may align with one Granada with the other, and the people in between become pawns in a game far larger than themselves. Historians still debate whether Nicaragua had any real chance of resisting this foreign manipulation, but here on the ground it feels like trying to stop the tide with bare hands. The Mosquito coast becomes the epicenter of this struggle. You travel through dense jungles where Mosquito warriors patrol with British rifles, their confidence bolstered by their foreign allies. Further inland, Nicaraguan troops, underfunded and poorly equipped, march wearily toward the coast, hoping to assert control. The encounters are tense but often inconclusive. Skirmishes flare and fade, treaties are signed and broken, and the coastline remains a contested prize. At night, by the glow of a campfire, a Nicaraguan soldier tells you bitterly, "We won independence only to invite new masters." His words hang in the humid air, heavy with truth. Meanwhile, in Managua, small as it is at this time, whispers of moving the capital to a more neutral ground begin to circulate. Leon and Granada's rivalry is so toxic that leaders seek an alternative anywhere to escape their endless feuds. The idea seems almost humorous now, a capital chosen just to keep two cities from strangling each other. But you know this compromise will shape the country's future geography. The British hold firm along the coast, establishing protectorates and installing puppet leaders who owe their loyalty to London. American interest only intensifies, especially after the California gold rush of the 1840s makes quick passage between oceans more valuable than ever. You watch as American engineers survey the San Juan River, calculating depths and currents, their notebooks filled with sketches of bridges and locks that exist only in their imaginations. For a moment, you almost admire their audacity while Nicaraguans fight among themselves. Foreigners dream big. You travel back inland where civil war still simmers and the air smells of powder and ash. In Leon, liberal leaders rail against both British influence and conservative dominance, calling for a republic free from all chains. In Granada, conservatives seek order, even if it means flirting with foreign alliances to secure their power. The clash of ideals and interests continues to spill blood across the valleys. One evening, as you walk through a burned-out village, a child tugs at your sleeve and asks, "Who are we fighting now?" You have no answer. The war seems to have no single enemy, only shifting shadows. As the 1840s turned to the 1850s, the United States and Britain signed the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty, agreeing neither will dominate a Central American canal, at least on paper. You overhear diplomats celebrating this as a victory for balance, but you can't help smirking at the naivety. Both powers still maneuver behind the scenes, and Nicaragua remains their chessboard. The local people, meanwhile, continue planting crops, fishing, and rebuilding what the wars destroy, their resilience as steady as the volcanoes that rise above them. Standing on the Caribbean shore at dusk, you watch British ships anchor calmly in the bay, while American steamers glide into port with the confidence of newcomers who plan to stay. The sky turns blood red over the horizon, and the waves lap the sand in a slow, mocking rhythm. Nicaragua, caught between rival powers and its own internal conflicts, walks a narrow path where every step risks another stumble. You know the worst is yet to come. The young republic will soon face trials fiercer than anything it has endured so far. You arrive in the early 1850s to find Nicaragua teetering between fragile sovereignty and outright collapse. The country is officially independent, yes, but its streets hum with unrest, its cities bristle with rivalry, and its borders strain under foreign ambitions. The air in Leon feels heavy with suspicion. Even as liberals shout for reform, they eye their neighbors warily, knowing conservatives in Granada plot with equal passion for their own vision. Civil wars flare up repeatedly, with alliances forming and breaking in the time it takes for gunpowder smoke to clear. You walk past a square littered with broken muskets and abandoned flags, a silent testimony to battles where victory means little because peace never follows. Granada, stronghold of conservatives, rises from each skirmish, more determined to crush liberal ideals. You watch its elites host lavish gatherings in candlelit halls, toasting to order while rebels regroup in the shadows. Leon answers with fiery speeches and militias that march through the streets with tattered banners. You move between these cities and feel the land itself divided like a heart pulled in two directions. Historians still argue whether this period was a noble fight over ideology or a brutal contest for power disguised as principle. Standing amid the smoke and dust, you know it's both an idealistic dream choking on its own contradictions. Foreign powers exploit the chaos. The British maintain their grip on the Mosquito coast, patrolling with sleek warships while their agents stir dissent inland. You step into a coastal village where a British officer offers gifts to local leaders, smiling as if charity rather than control motivates him. The Union Jack flutters against the palm trees, an unsubtle reminder of who really calls the shots there. Meanwhile, the United States lurks with growing interest. American investors and adventurers flood Nicaragua, lured by the possibility of a trans-Isthmian route, and for some, by the sheer thrill of conquest. It is in this climate that the infamous American filibuster William Walker enters the stage. You see him arrive with a band of mercenaries in 1855, his face calm, his ambitions anything but. Quirky as it sounds, he claims to bring order and progress, yet what he really brings is chaos wrapped in the language of destiny. Granada's conservatives, desperate to defeat their liberal rivals, make the fateful choice to invite him in, hoping to use his forces to secure their dominance. You watch them welcome him like a savior, not realizing they have opened the door to a predator. Historians still debate whether Walker was a madman, a visionary, or merely a product of his time. As you observe his cold, calculating gaze, you sense he is all three. Walker quickly takes control, declaring himself president of Nicaragua in 1856, and even reinstituting slavery to curry favor with American Southern interests. The irony is thick enough to taste. After decades of fighting off colonial rule, Nicaragua finds itself under the thumb of a foreign adventurer who speaks the language of freedom while tightening chains. You stand in a Leon street as angry whispers spread, the people realizing they've traded one form of oppression for another. The church bells ring, but this time they sound hollow, as if mourning the very idea of independence. Resistance grows swiftly. Both liberals and conservatives, realizing Walker threatens them all, unite to expel him. You watch an unlikely alliance form, forged not by trust, but by necessity. Neighboring Central American countries, Costa Rica, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, join the fight, sending troops to push back against Walker's forces. The campaign of 1856-1857 unfolds, and you follow soldiers through muddy fields and smoky battlefields, their faces determined despite exhaustion. In the Battle of San Jacinto, Nicaraguan troops win a crucial victory, and you see the tide begin to turn. The sense of unity, rare and fleeting, burns brightly in this moment. Walker's fall is as dramatic as his rise. You witness him flee Granada, the city he once held as his stronghold, setting it ablaze in a bitter act of spite. Flames lick the sky as wooden beams collapse, the night glowing red over the lake. Families clutch each other and flee, tears streaming down their faces as their homes burn. The city's destruction becomes a symbol. Independence is not only fragile, but also easily consumed by those who misuse it. Walker is eventually captured and executed in 1860, his dreams of empire extinguished, but the scars he leaves on Nicaragua remain. The aftermath is a nation exhausted. You wander through markets where people rebuild their lives, hammering new roofs and sowing new crops while still glancing over their shoulders, wary of what comes next. Leon and Granada, though still rivals, share the burden of reconstruction, their bitterness muted by mutual suffering. Foreign powers linger, their ambitions undimmed, but for now the Republic breathes, battered yet alive. Quirky as it sounds, some townsfolk celebrate not with grand parades, but with quiet meals, grateful just to see another day without gunfire. Managua, once a small settlement, begins to rise in importance, chosen eventually as the capital to neutralize the endless feud between Leon and Granada. You stand on its dusty streets as officials mark out new buildings, their voices hopeful that this compromise might finally bring stability. It feels like a gamble, but then again, so does everything in Nicaragua's young history. As the sun sets over Lake Nicaragua, painting the water gold, you reflect on the Republic's journey. From colonial domination to fragile independence, from foreign meddling to civil war, and finally to survival against one of history's strangest invaders, Nicaragua has endured it all. Historians still argue whether these early decades forged its strength or doomed it to cycles of conflict. But as you watch the last rays fade behind the volcanoes, you sense the answer lies somewhere in between. The Republic, tested by fire and ambition, still stands scarred but unbroken. The night deepens and the land grows quiet. You lie back under the starlit sky, letting the cool breeze wash over you. The story slows, its frantic drumbeat easing into a calm rhythm. You think of the farmers who kept planting, the women who kept their families together, the soldiers who fought with whatever they could hold, and the leaders who stumbled and rose again. Independence was never a single moment. It was 1,000 small choices, victories and losses. And as you drift, the cricket's song lulls you, the stars blur, and the final image stays with you, a nation still finding its path, walking forward into the unknown, its heart stubbornly refusing to give in. The air softens and so does your pace. You leave behind the gunpowder smoke, the embers of burnt cities, and the noise of clashing voices, stepping into a Nicaragua calmer than it has been in decades. The breeze off the lakes carries the scent of wet earth and blooming flowers, washing away the heat of history's turmoil. You walk slowly through the countryside where fireflies rise like tiny lanterns and the songs of frogs ripple across the night. Each step feels lighter, as though the land itself exhales after centuries of holding its breath. The people too move at this gentler rhythm now. They rebuild homes where walls once crumbled, plant crops in fields long scarred by battles, and laugh softly under the shade of fruit trees. There are no proclamations here, no speeches, just the quiet persistence of life. You pass a woman kneeling to light a small candle, at a roadside cross her lips, murmuring a prayer for peace. You see children chasing each other through the dust, their laughter bright against the fading light. These simple moments, small as they seem, hold the true weight of independence. Even the cities, still bearing the marks of their rivalries, hum with a softer energy. Leon's plazas glow with lantern-light voices spilling out from cafes where debates have cooled to conversations. Granada's lakeside streets reflect the moon, its rebuilt houses standing proud but humble. And Managua, still young, stirs quietly, ready to grow into the role history has handed it. The volcanoes rise in the distance, silent sentinels that have watched all of this unfold. Their silhouettes against the starlit sky remind you that time is patient, that nations like mountains are shaped slowly by fire and wind. The rivers murmur, the earth rests, and so do you. You close your eyes, hearing only the night sounds of a land that has survived storms, foreign hands, and its own divisions. The story fades into a whisper, and with it comes reassurance. The future is unwritten, but Nicaragua will keep walking forward step by steady step under the same stars that have guided it all along.